Connecting WordPress with Azure AD and Microsoft 365 is super easy. Hi, I'm Marco, and in this video I would like to show you how easy it is to synchronize users from Azure AD to your WordPress website. To achieve this, you must first extend the functionality of WordPress, and you can do this by installing the WPO 365 login plugin. You can download it for free from the WordPress plugins directory. The WPO 365 login plugin by default will help you to enable Microsoft-based single sign-on for your WordPress website users. But it can do a lot more. It can also help you to synchronize users from Azure AD to your WordPress website. But you must unlock that feature. To unlock that feature, you must navigate to the WPO365.com website. And here, on the one hand side, you'll find a list of all available features that you can unlock if you buy a premium package. A premium package can be an extension or a bundle. If you scroll back up to the website, you see another link that shows you all the available bundles and extensions. To unlock user synchronization, you can choose between the WPO 365 Intranet bundle and the WPO 365 Sync bundle. To compare both, you can click to see a full list of the features included in both the plugins, the bundles, but for this video I will select the WPO 365 Sync bundle. Well, enough talking, let's get started. So, to get started, I will log in to my WordPress website. The WordPress website that I'm using for this video is hosted at WP Engine, as you can see, and I have already installed the WPO 365 login plugin, and I've configured Microsoft-based single sign-on. There's another video in my YouTube video channel that you can view to see how to configure Microsoft-based single sign-on. Today is all about synchronizing users from Azure AD to your WordPress website. So let's click sign in with Microsoft. Let's select my account so that I get administrator access to my WordPress website. I can continue to the WordPress admin dashboard, and here my first interest is to see what plugins did I install. At the moment, I have, as I just said, installed, activated and configured the WPO 365 login plugin. And as you can see, I already uploaded a second plugin, which is the WPO 365 Sync plugin. Before I now continue and activate the WPO 365 Sync bundle, let's quickly have a look at the WPO 365 configuration pages. Here on the user sync page, you can actually see that user synchronization is still locked as a feature. So let's quickly go back to the installed plugins and scroll down and now activate the bundle. And once it's activated, obviously I go back to the WPO 365 configuration pages, and again, when I now look at the user sync configuration page, then I can see that most of the features that I can configure on this configuration page are indeed enabled. To configure user synchronization, I recommend that you navigate back to the website WPO365.com and you click support and follow the link for documentation where you search for user synchronization. And there you'll find two articles basically on synchronizing users from Azure AD to WordPress. Obviously you don't want to click the link for the deprecated article, or actually the article that describes how you can configure the previous version of user synchronization. If you are using the latest version of the plugin, any version that is equal or higher to version 15, then you should follow the article to configure what is basically called user synchronization v2 version 2. Well, before you start, there's a number of things that you need to check. Have you indeed installed a bundle that would enable user synchronization, well, we did, as you saw before. You must be a global administrator for Azure AD, or at least have access to somebody who is, because you need to make some changes to the configuration of the app registration. You must be an administrator for your WordPress website, or else you cannot configure the WPO 365 plugin. And ideally, you have already configured single sign-on. It's not a must in a technical way, but it's strongly recommended, and without it you would still see some error messages that it's unconfigured otherwise in your WP admin. So, having made sure that all the prerequisites are in place, we can continue with the configuration of the plugin. For user synchronization, there are a number of settings, a number of options that you must change so that user synchronization will work as expected. There are two ways of dealing with that. You can look up each of these options listed in this table. You'll see on which of the configuration pages you can find this option, and you can see the value that you need to replace or add to a list. The other approach would be that you go back to the WPO 365 plugins configuration pages and you go to the plugin self-test. And here you scroll down a little bit and you click to start that self-test. The self-test of the plugin will basically, each time when you run it, sign you in with Microsoft and perform a number of checks based on the configuration, based on the extensions and bundles that are installed and that unlock certain functions. So let's have a look at the results of the plugin's self-test. The first thing that I notice is that I've installed the latest version of the bundle that I purchased, the WPO 365 Sync. That's great. The bundle, however, has a built-in update checker. So you would also see in the standard plugins overview of WordPress that a new version would be available. Make sure to always update and stay up to date with all the plugins. I think that's not only true for WPO 365 plugins, but in general for all the plugins, for all the WordPress versions, to stay safe and secure. And also benefit, of course, from all the new features that are added time and again. I'm not paying any attention to the Microsoft-based single sign-on configuration. That's a different topic, and there's a different video for that. I pay a little bit more or a closer attention to the errors that are reported in the configuration section. However, the important configurations that may be missing are repeated further down, then there is a special section for user synchronization. So here I can see that the domain hint is not configured, but it's not so important, so I leave it as it is. I see that custom domain names are missing. This is very important for user synchronization, but the test will be repeated further down. And also the custom REST API endpoint that the plugin needs to access several times when you configure user synchronization. It has not been added to the list of pages freed from authentication. Therefore, we could not connect to it at this point in time, but also this can be fixed later on. The one thing that I will fix here, by the way, is that I personally prefer to work with the beta version of Microsoft Graph. It just gives access to a richer data set. Obviously, there's always the discussion whether you can use Microsoft Graph Beta for a production system. I believe you can, but it might be unstable. So you could see changes, but in my experience so far, most of the changes have been that data has been added, endpoints has been added there, and not to version 1. So beta really simply is the way to go. So I want to use it, so I could either now go to the integration page of the plugins configuration pages, or I can simply click Fix It. Each time when I click the Fix It Now button, the plugin will try and fix the problem if it can, but also will then repeat the self-test to immediately make sure has it been fixed. So it takes me back to the plugin self-test results, and if I scroll down now to the configuration section, I would expect that the beta version of Microsoft Graph has now been selected. Yes, the setting has changed. So that's great. So I'll continue down to the user sync section. As you can see here, there are basically, at this point in time, 2 tests that are being performed. And one time the test is performed to synchronize users with delegated permissions, and one time the test is performed to synchronize users with application permissions. So, what's the difference? Well, the difference is that in this video, I won't configure the ability of the plugin to synchronize users with delegated permissions, but instead I will only configure the user synchronization feature based on application permissions. What's the difference? The difference is that delegated permissions are permissions that are granted to the currently logged in user. And application permissions are permissions granted to an application. In this case, application permissions would be granted to the WPO 365 plugin. So that means that the plugin can act independently from the logged in user, can synchronize users from Azure AD to WordPress independently of the logged in user. And that is something that is a must, that is needed, that's required if you want, for example, to synchronize users on a schedule. Because if you synchronize users on a schedule, there is no user logged in, maybe. Well, at least not necessarily the administrator who would otherwise trigger it and who would have enough permissions maybe to synchronize users in the first place. So I think it only makes sense to synchronize users with application permissions. So therefore I will ignore the section on synchronizing users with delegated permissions. If you do go ahead with configuring delegated permissions for user synchronization, then you will only be able to run user synchronization on demand, to click the button and to start user synchronization manually, but you won't be able to call it externally from a link or to schedule it to start every day or every week by itself. But it says here, to start user synchronization, you must actually enable it. Again, here I can choose to go to the user sync configuration page and click the option to enable it, or I can say fix it. So let's fix it. And again, the plugin will go through the same iteration. It will try and fix the option and enable user sync, and it will then one more time repeat the login sequence, the plugin self-test, and take me back to the plugin self-test result page. Again, here now I can scroll down, I can skip over all the other tests, I immediately scroll down to user sync, and here I'll notice that with delegated permissions I must configure custom domains, and you see that the same thing is needed if I want to configure synchronization of users with application permissions. What you also may notice now is that there is an extra test. There's an extra test which checks if WP cron is disabled. This is a somewhat longer story, and I'll come back to this point. For now, I will continue with the configuration of the plugin to enable to allow user synchronization. And for that, I need to configure at least one custom domain. So I'll go on the one hand side to my custom domain page in Azure AD to see what domains I actually need to add. And these are the login domains. These are the email domains. And some of those I can add. So if I go back to the plugin self-test results, I see that I must add these domain names on the plugin's user registration page. So let's do that. Let's click there. It takes me to this user registration page, and here at the top I see a list of custom domains. So let's see which one I want to add. I see I have several domains, but I want to add wpo365.com because my users will all have username at wpo365.com. That's the domain that I want to add. And this information helps the plugin to understand what user comes from your domain, from your Azure AD tenant, and what user does not come from your Azure AD tenant. When it starts comparing users in WordPress with users that it retrieves from Microsoft Graph, from Azure AD. So I add the domain here. Be very careful, you must click the plus here. That is sometimes a bit confusing. So I made a change and I will save the configuration. Don't forget also to do that. Make sure it's a little bit darker, then you know that you've really added this. And I go back to the plugin self-test page. And I would again click to start the self-test. And the same sequence repeats, and the plugin will again test its configuration. And I will scroll down to the user sync section. And now I can see that if I look in the section for user sync with application permissions, that, oh, I have not added the default cloud domain that ends with onmicrosoft.com. Because users may either be given your default or your custom domain name, in my case wpo365.com, but for instance external users that I added, external identities that I added with Azure AD B2B for instance, they will have usernames that will have my tenant's default domain. So I also copy this. I will go back to WordPress, I go back to the user registration page, I again scroll up and I'll paste what I just added and again click the plus at the end, repeat what I did. I click to save the configuration and return to the plugin self-test and again click to start the plugin self-test. Sign in one more time and scroll down to see whether I'm now all set up and start with synchronizing users from Azure AD. No, I'm not, because it actually says, oh, there is something missing. I must add a path that is the path to the custom REST API that the plugin adds to WordPress. I must add this path to the list of pages freed from authentication. If you don't do that, if you miss this step, then later on you will notice that you're unable to configure a user synchronization job because the plugin cannot reach its own API. So it's very simple to fix it. Simply click the button again and let's repeat the sequence. We'll test one more time whether we're almost there. Having said that, if you are using a plugin that maybe blocks access to WordPress, to the WordPress REST API, then you must see how you deal with this, because you might have a problem then. There might be an issue that the plugin can then not access the REST API, but it must. It's a must requirement. Without it, you cannot continue with the configuration. So I'm back in the sync section, and now it says I must enable the WPO365 API for Microsoft Graph as well. Well, it's a little bit the same. On the one hand side, the plugin provides this custom WordPress REST API, but on the other hand, the REST API must also be enabled. By default, it's not enabled, so I have to click the button to fix it. And this is a sequence we know very well by now. The plugin runs its self-test, and again I scroll down to the user sync configuration to see, am I done now? And then it says to me, oh, hold on. It's recommended to have a second app registration in Azure Active Directory for more advanced scenarios like user synchronization. In other words, I need to configure an app registration in Azure AD that the plugin can use to obtain these application permissions that I explained previously. So let's do that. So let's create this second app registration that the plugin needs to be able to act independently from the logged in user, to act as itself basically and obtain application permissions from Azure AD to access Microsoft Graph. Quickly check back with the documentation. We completed basically the plugin configuration so far, and as you can see, now it's all about the API permissions. Again, what I just explained is also explained in the documentation, the difference between delegated permissions and application permissions. If you want to reread this, please consult the documentation. Let's now go back to our Azure AD and create this second app registration. It's obviously possible that you already created this second app registration. There are other scenarios other than user synchronization where this is also recommended. You may have created one in the past already for user synchronization version 1. Then obviously you can skip this step. Let's click App Registrations and click to create a new app registration, and let's give it a good name, one that we remember later. I usually use the website address, so in this case I would simply copy the URL and I would, I scrolled wrong, and I would pipe it with some meaningful label. For instance, that this is the app only permissions. I could simply say that I want to register the application in this form, and what you may notice is I don't configure a redirect URL at this point for this application. I don't add a platform. I also don't configure a token configuration for it. I simply directly go to API permissions. And here I will click to add a permission, an application permission, Microsoft Graph application permission, to read all users, users read all, and I can click here to open it and I can edit. And if you are planning on dynamically assigning WordPress roles based on a user's Azure AD group memberships, then or you want to prevent users who are not member of a certain Azure AD group to access your WordPress website, then you must add another Microsoft Graph application permission, namely to group read all, so that the plugin can ask for any user all the groups that he or she is a member of. So we add the permissions. Basically, this is it almost. As you can see, there is a little question mark here, but also if there would not be a question mark here, always click Grant Admin Consent for your tenant. If you don't, things will not work as expected. I can see that I've granted this now, and so for that I'm happy. The next thing that I now need to do is to create a secret. I need to create a so-called client secret. It's kind of the password. So the application, the plugin can now basically use the application ID of this app that we just registered plus a password, its secret, and to independently from the logged in user sign in to Azure AD. So I can click to create a new client secret. I can say it expires maybe in 2 years. Don't even need to add a description, and I can copy the value of the client secret. Don't copy the secret ID. We really need the value. This is something Microsoft added recently, and it adds to the confusion. You really need to copy the value of the secret. So let's copy it. And we're actually already done here in Azure AD. So I go back to WordPress, and this time I go and I scroll up and I need to navigate to the plugins integration page. And here I have to click first of all to say I want to use an application token, an app-only token. I want to configure application access. So I confirm, and I just copied the secret already, so I will paste that here. And I will go back one more time to my Azure portal, and I will go to the overview page of the app that I just registered, and I will copy the application client ID to the clipboard and paste it here as well. Basically that's all. I can click one time just in case to delete all the tokens. I prefer to do that each time when I make a change, either to permissions or to the configuration of the plugin on the integration page. And I click to save and test integration. Basically it will say that because I not enabled the token service here, that it is not enabled, but I think we've done it well, so I leave it as it is. I go back to the plugin self-test and click to start the self-test to see where we stand with the configuration of user synchronization using the WPO 365 plugins. So let's scroll down to the user sync section one more time. And here I can see that synchronization of users with application permissions now seems to be working okay. It's fine. I can even click and see a sample of the data that the plugin was able to retrieve from Microsoft Graph, from Azure AD basically. So I can close that again. It's not important what it exactly retrieved. It's important that it was able to retrieve something. Are we done yet? No. Before, I skipped one test. WP cron is disabled. And we need to do something about this. I don't know whether you're familiar with WP cron and what it does and what it is. But it is basically a service that can trigger a job, like a user synchronization job, or a part of a user synchronization job, independently of the logged in user. It's basically a task scheduling system. I can tell WP cron, please at this time execute user synchronization, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, etc. But WP cron doesn't run continuously. It only runs when a user requests a page of your website. So it's actually not very stable. It's not very reliable. Therefore, it's recommended that you disable WordPress cron by adding a line to your WordPress config, and instead you configure an external task scheduling service that would trigger WP cron at regular intervals, for instance every minute. Well, of course that's a very technical story. I recommend that if you want to read more about this, please follow this link and you'll find a separate article about hooking WP cron into a task scheduling service in the documentation repository. For now, let's do as we are asked. Let's disable WP cron, and to do that I will need to use FTP to access my website. I would basically edit my WP config file, and in my case the entry is already there. It is here, disable WP cron, and I can set that to true. In other situations you may not have this entry already in your WP config file, and you may need to enter to add the whole line. I can close it, I can save it. FileZilla will ask me whether it should upload it and should delete the local file. I say yes. And basically now I've updated WP config and I can close my FileZilla again. So having done that, I am of course interested to see whether this is indeed correctly registered now. So I run the plugin self-test one more time again. And once the results are there, I will scroll down to user sync. And here I can see that I have disabled WP cron, but since I want to call it from an external service, I must make sure that WP cron PHP has been added to this list of pages that are freed from authentication. Otherwise, an external service would call this URL and the WPO 365 plugin will actually block that service calling the URL. But it can easily be fixed by clicking the button, which is what I do here. And After it's been fixed, the plugin will test itself one more time, and we should be all good now. So let's have another look at the results. Let's scroll down to the user sync section, and it says WP cron is disabled, and also that test has passed. So at this point in time, we are ready for user synchronization. We are ready to configure a user synchronization job that I can run manually, trigger externally from a link, or that can be triggered from a WP cron, from a WordPress cron scheduled task. So let's get started. 30 minutes down the line, and we have already achieved a lot. First of all, we checked all the prerequisites to enable user synchronization from Azure AD to our WordPress website. We created in Azure AD a new app registration that gives our plugin application permissions, so it can work independently. It can independent from a logged in user, synchronize users from Azure AD to WordPress. And last but not least, we've updated our WordPress and our plugin configuration. We disabled WP cron and updated all the necessary options that are needed for a smooth running of user synchronization. So that's good news. We've ran the plugin self-test, and all the tests passed and were okay. So I think there's nothing more to it than just create a new user synchronization job. So I would go to the WPO 365 configuration pages, and specifically I would click to continue to the user sync configuration page. Here I can click to add a new job. And when I do that, the job is immediately added. I don't need to click save configuration or so. As you can see, this job has a very technical name, which we can ignore for the moment. What I just want to point out at this point in time is that I can click to add a second job. If I do that, however, and you have to be very careful with this and very careful with this feature, then the plugin won't be able to delete users when it's synchronizing users. So if you have one job, then the plugin would be able to understand what users are in Azure AD and need to be in WordPress. And it also is able to understand what users from Azure AD are still in WordPress and need to be deleted. If you have two jobs, then unfortunately the plugin, actually the user sync processor, you can call it like that, won't be able to delete users. So handle with care. If you want to soft delete or delete users through user synchronization, then you cannot configure a second job. So I have to confirm that I want to create a second job, and in this moment in time I would have a second job, but I don't want that. I also want to delete the user, so I can actually click to expand this job definition, scroll a little bit down and click to delete the job again. So now I'm back to the original situation. I have one job for user synchronization that has a very technical name and that now needs to be configured. So again, I click to expand the job and I can give it a sounding name, a name that tells me what the job is for. So for instance, I would like to synchronize all the employees from Azure AD to my WordPress website. So let's call the job all employees. And as you see, the technical name here at the top is now changed and it's now all employees. So if I collapse it, I can really understand what this job is for and what will be done there. The ID is still there, of course, but we've replaced it with a more eloquent name. The second thing that also appears to be red, which means that it needs to be tested first, is the user sync query. There is a default query that you can use, and it would basically try and retrieve all the users that have their account enabled, means they can log in. So account enabled is equal true, and that have a user type that is equal to member. Here you have to be a bit careful, by the way, as we found out the user type will be null, for instance, if you synchronize your users from Active Directory first to Azure Active Directory. Then user type may be null, and this query actually may return no user at all, which then is, of course, a little bit confusing. And then, last but not least, there is a very important part of the query. If you change the query, you must always add this last parameter, which the parameter is actually $top, and it must be equal to a number. And it defines the page size that will be used by the user synchronization processor to retrieve a batch of users and process it before it will retrieve the next batch. So the user synchronization processor is able to process the users in batches, and it must be able, because if you are synchronizing users at enterprise scale, say you want to synchronize 5,000 users, and you would synchronize them all at once, well, first of all, Microsoft Graph won't return 5,000 items. I think it will automatically start paging that result, but also the other way around. Your WordPress server won't be able to process so many users in an amount of time that would prevent the server from running into a timeout. And then when it runs into a timeout, then obviously your user synchronization will fail in the end. So you have to choose a moderate page size. I would say go with 10. You could try 20, but don't maximize it. Don't try to find there the limits, because if it fails, then you're kind of out of sync. So I would say 10, 20 is maybe possible, but don't go really beyond that. So this is the default query, and I can click to test my query. And if I click to test my query, I can see the raw output that Microsoft Graph returns to us. I can inspect it, and I can basically just really page through all of the results. So I could really see with this query, what will Microsoft Graph return to me? But it's raw data, of course. So that is how it's implemented at the moment. What you may notice as well is here at the top. There, the query has been modified. The plugin has added another parameter, and that is the count parameter. That helps the user synchronization processor to know how many users will be returned by this query, so that it also knows its own progress. It can track its progress. So if you ever see this parameter, please don't remove it. If you don't add it yourself, the plugin will try and add it for you. So you actually don't need to worry about it, but don't remove it. Even though the plugin will try and re-add it if you do. So this is a useful tool that can help you to inspect the results that Microsoft Graph will return to you. If you're unhappy with the tool, because it's, of course, it's not very advanced, then there is always the opportunity to switch to the Microsoft Graph tool, the tool that Microsoft has provided. So if we look for Microsoft Graph Explorer and search for it, then we'll find the Microsoft Graph Explorer that Microsoft provides to us. And as you can see, there is authentication required. You must sign in to, I would say, play around with the data, play around with Microsoft Graph with data from your own tenant. If you would not sign in, you would get kind of fake data. So I sign in to Microsoft Graph, select my account, and here I could test the same query that I'm currently testing with the help of the plugin. So here the query would be this part. So let's just simply copy this query and switch back to Microsoft Graph and add this query. So I leave basically everything up to that I want to connect to Microsoft Graph and the version of that, and then add my query, and I can say run this query. And if I run the query, I will get a similar response as you can see here at the top. And here you can also see, for instance, that you get a next link. This is the paging mechanism that Microsoft Graph provides to you. You can use this next link to get the next batch of users. Well, enough said. You can also read about Microsoft Graph in the documentation if you're interested in it. Let's return to the plugin, to our user synchronization job. We've tested the query, there is a result, and that is enough at this point in time. If I close it, I can see that query no longer appears as red, and I'll see that here is a check now that says the query has been tested successfully. That's good news. There is some inspiration for sample queries. If you want to get all non-disabled internal users from Azure AD, that is this query that we're using, you could type the plus and it will replace this query. You could also have a query to get all nested members basically of an Azure AD group. You can type this query. You need to replace then a placeholder with a group ID, the group of which you want to get all users from. But I think it kind of shows itself. And if you have a nice idea to add a query here where you think other users would benefit from, then please send it to me and I will make sure it gets added here in this list. Well, next up is that I can configure the user synchronization processor what actions should be performed during user synchronization. Should new users be created in WordPress? Should existing users be updated? Should existing users in WordPress that no longer exist in Azure AD, or at least are not returned by the query, maybe they do exist, but maybe they are excluded by the query, should they be deleted in WordPress? And whether or not we should ignore external identities. Well, let's be brave. Let's say we want to create users, we want to update existing users, and we want to delete users as well. If I click to delete users, if I choose to delete users, I have the option between choosing or between soft deletion, and if I click that, it basically means that a user is not deleted from WordPress, but he or she will be stripped of all his WordPress roles. Plus, the plugin will prevent this user from signing in. So the user cannot sign into WordPress anymore. He will see a notification that the account has been deactivated and that sign-in is prevented. If I don't check the option to soft delete a user, which basically leaves the user in WordPress, then I have the possibility, or I actually must, choose a user that will be used for reassigning posts to. So if one user is deleted and this user created content in WordPress, he's the author of some of the posts, then I can now specify a user, and for instance, let's look at my own user. I can search for this user and the plugin will try and find the best match for that user that I'm searching for. And basically now all users that get deleted by the plugin, that have created content and that are author of posts or pages, they will be deleted, but their posts or pages won't be deleted, but get reassigned to the user that has been specified here. Yes, so I think let's scroll down a little further. Then the next part up is what should trigger the user synchronization. And here you now have three options. You can say, I run it manually. If you run it manually, you can simply click the button, save and run now. Another option is that you use an external cron service. And this external service, if you check it, can call this URL. And by calling this URL, the user synchronization job, this user synchronization job will start. So you can copy it to your clipboard and you can take it and you can use an external task scheduler that would then basically start the user synchronization as per schedule that you've configured in the external task scheduling service. And the last option is if you say, I don't want to use an external cron service, I will use the WordPress internal cron service. Well, we've talked a little bit about this already. This WordPress cron service doesn't run continuously. It runs whenever a page or post is requested at the front end of the page. Then basically a cron request is put on top of that request and is being executed. By disabling cron and by calling wp-cron.php very regularly, for instance every minute, you can kind of work around this shortcoming. So by using it, by compensating this, by working around this shortcoming, you can then create a schedule and you can say, I want to run it every day of the week or once a week and then you can choose a day of the week. So if you say, I want to run it every day of the week, and then you can say, I want to run it now, or I want to run it always at a given time. I had many requests in the past that users said, I want to run it multiple times per day. So for those users, if you want to run user synchronization multiple times per day, then it's strongly recommended that you choose the external link option, take this link and configure an external cron service that will call the user synchronization multiple times, maybe once per hour, and execute this user synchronization job. So enough said. I think for the moment and for this video, I will keep it to run manually. And then there are two basically progress tracking items part of the job that keeps us informed when has the job last run and how is it progressing. We will see this a little bit later. And last but not least, I can say that I want the user synchronization processor to send a log file each time when it completes, and I want the log file to be sent to, for instance, my email address. So let's look at marco@wpo365.com. So we're all set. So I want to send it the log, I want to send it to me, and basically I'm all done at this point in time. I have configured my user synchronization job. So let's see what happens if I try and run this job. I click save and run now, and I can see that here's a little spinning wheel and I need to wait. I should not navigate away from the page at this point in time. Need to wait and see what's happening. And that can take a little while, depending also a little bit on the processing speed. But then after the first batch of users has been processed, you'll see the progress of your job. You can see that 10 out of 21 users have been processed, and this will continue a little bit. If I scroll down, I can see still that there is a spinner turning. So we're not ready yet. So there's the second batch completed, 20 out of 21 users, and there's the third batch completed. 21 out of 21 users have been synchronized, and we're all done. This job has run. 21 users have been processed, and I can now click to view the results of that. And if I click here, I can see what users have been created, what users have been updated, have users been activated, deleted, has there been an error, or are users skipped. So to understand that a little bit, skipped users are, for instance, users that are already in WordPress, but that cannot be matched with users from Azure AD. To understand how that works, you have to call into memory that we configured the custom domains. The domains used by Azure AD to define the login domains, the email domains for users in Azure AD. And there we have the custom domain. In my case, that was wpo365.com, and we had a default domain that was wpo365demo.onmicrosoft.com. And it's basically this information that the plugin uses to look in WordPress whether a WordPress user has either a username that can be matched with the domain part of the custom domains, or has an email address that would be matching with these domains that I configured as custom domains. So therefore, if you would have left the custom domain list empty in the plugin configuration, then the plugin will basically skip all users, because it would not have no knowledge of users that are from Azure AD, so it won't be able to match those users. So in my case, I had 4 users that are skipped. If I can actually click on this and I can see what users are skipped. And here I can see that is one user from Outlook.com, from WP Blogs, from WP Engine, Gmail. So these are indeed users not from my domain. I can also click back to all, and then I see all results. I can see what users were created. I can also see what user was updated. And if I go back to all, I can also click to see what users were not synchronized because an error occurred. And then in the notes, I can just hover with my mouse over here, and I can see that it had a problem with creating the user, well, with a very long username. The reason for that is an error generated that you will see when you would switch back now to the debug log. Because the error in this case is that the username is too long, so the user could not be created. Good. I could actually go back and see all. If there's now a very specific user that I want to look up, if I want to check whether the user with demo at WPO has been searched, I can type a part of his username or display name, press enter, and then the results are searched for, basically from my keyword that I'm searching for. So this will help you as well to inspect the results. So I can close that. I think we've told enough about that. And last but not least, I could maybe tell one more important thing that I could have done in the beginning, to be honest. If I would not have checked any of the options, if I would have simply said I want to run user synchronization without any action defined, without creating, updating or deleting users, and I would then click save and run now, then basically my user synchronization job is running in kind of a preview mode. And I would strongly recommend that you first and ever always run your job in this preview mode. You can also see it goes a lot quicker then, because there's of course no WordPress user that needs to be updated or created or deleted. So it's really only a logging that occurs in this case. And if I now click on view results, you can see that exactly that happened. It logged basically the users that it retrieved from Azure AD. And the status is also logged, so it didn't change anything of this. Yes, I think this is a very good start of explaining how you can synchronize users from Azure AD to your WordPress website and all the options that are available to you. So user synchronization, when it's triggered manually, is working fine. But I want to call it from a schedule. So I scroll down and I would change my trigger from running manually to WordPress cron. But hold on, we need to define a schedule. We need to say it needs to run, for instance, every day of the week, and maybe at this hour of the day, or you could pick any of the options available to you. So let's leave that now, that's okay. But hold on. Let's call into memory that we've actually disabled the WordPress cron system. So that means WordPress cron tasks that are created as WordPress cron tasks are not executed at all. And that's not a healthy situation. So we need to work around that. And to work around that, you need to have a task scheduling service or something that calls your WP -cron.php page every minute of the day. And to do so, I suggest that you create an Uptime Robot account, and you then take your website address and you go to uptimerobot.com and you go to your dashboard and you would create a new monitor. Uptime Robot basically checks whether your website is available. And it does so by, for instance, calling an HTTP address. And you can create an HTTP address, in this case, for your website. So in my case, it's wpo365.wpengine.com. But I'm not calling the website. I'm actually calling my the WP cron trigger. So I say wp-cron.php, and it's being called every minute. If you don't buy a plan, it's called every 5 minutes. I would not recommend that. I would really say take the cheapest plan. It's $8 in a month at the moment. I think $7 if you're a new customer. And I think it's really worth it because it's also a great way of monitoring your website in the first place. Because if it's down, you will get an alert, and the alert can also come on your mobile phone, and that is really a great way of making sure your website is up and running. So I have a friendly name, fill that out. I set my monitoring interval to once every minute, and I can actually also say that if it's down, please update my app and update my phone or send me an email. Well, happy with that, so I can create the monitor, and the monitor is created. I can close it, and it will be up and running. My website, the cron system, my WordPress cron system of my website will be called every minute, so I can rest assured that WordPress cron is running continuously and in a way that is reliable. And I schedule my job to run every day of the week, and I want to run it around this hour of the day. So to start the scheduled job, I can save and schedule the job. And when I've done so, I can see that the next run is around, basically now, because I selected now. So I can actually wait maybe a little bit and maybe 1 or 2 minutes to see if it's actually run already. To do that, I would maybe refresh my page once to see whether it's already running. And obviously I need to log on. And interestingly enough, actually the error that we saw before when I ran it manually, the user synchronization, that I have a user with a username that's longer than 60 characters has been nicely logged here, so I'm informed of that as well. So I scroll down, I'm on the user sync page, I scroll down, go to my all employees job, and I can have a look whether it's already ran. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So let's try one more time. And there I can see the job has started at 10:51, and so it's kind of around the time that I started, that I planned it for as well. Of course, it's always called once a minute, so there's always a little bit of a lagging or of a time lag maybe there, but that's not a problem, I would say. You can see it's progressing as we are, and now the next batches of the job are progressed minute by minute by minute. So if I wait another minute, I could see that it's 20 out of 21. If I wait another minute, it's 21 by 21, and an email will be sent as well that the job has completed. I think we're done. User synchronization is working. That's good news. It's working when I run it manually. It's working when I run it on a schedule. You could also schedule it externally by calling the appropriate link and binding that into a task scheduling service. And I think we're all good. I think we're done. I would really thank you for watching this video. I know it was a very long video, but I think it's also a very important topic. I hope I was able to clarify all the questions that you may have. I really hope you liked the video. Make sure you like the video by clicking the thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you have any questions, then please don't hesitate. Click the question mark. It will start a beacon. It's the best way of contacting me, contacting us, and making sure that we answer your question and that you are a happy customer up and running with WPO 365 and making sure that your Azure AD is connected with your WordPress website. Thank you for watching.